Good morning. Thanks, Catherine. Thanks for the invitation. I'm Carrie Christensen. I'm a senior planner at the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, but I'm also the partner and a co-business owner with Tory here, who's going to talk about what we do a little bit more. But first, I'm going to start with the park board perspective. This is one of the rare opportunities for me to be able to wear multiple hats in one 5-minute segment. So let's see how this goes. But this is this is Towerside. This is the district stormwater site. We thought we'd start sort of building off of what we ended with. And thanks to MWMO and Minnesota Design Center for the awesome visionary presentation that you just laid out. So I'm going to build a little bit more on that and what the park board's role is sort of emerging as. And think about it more, even though I'm a planner, and planners do tend to hover at a 10,000 foot level above the earth, really sort of more about thinking about implementation, and from our perspective, thinking with our partners like the developers, so Wall and Prospect Park Properties, thinking with them, thinking with MWMO, thinking with MDC, thinking with the youth, thinking with the community, with the neighborhood, what that's starting to look like in terms of drilling. The city, I should mention, also is a critical thinking partner, and not just thinking, but the doing. So I'm going to briefly touch on what, as we start to think about actually making this happen, what are the systems that matter to us? So we were brought to the table. I've been with the park board for a year, so I'm very much a baby there. And one of the projects that I'm working on, which I'll talk more about, is this master planning process, looking at all the neighborhood parks and potential park connections east of the river, so in northeast and southeast Minneapolis. So it's very much this large portion of our entire system that I'm looking at. And as part of that, this idea of new parks and new park connections. So enter Towerside. It's this conversation that's been happening for a number of years. Our planning process kicked off about 6 months ago, and it's been great to bring our planning process and really dovetail into this long-term community-led, institution-led collaboration and dream and plan. So that's one of my favorite parts of planning, is to look for those moments of dovetail. And I think that as we can support each other and be strategic, like how can we dovetail? How can we stack those functions? How can we find the values that we share and build off those? But when we talk about the actual doing, this is what innovation looks like to us. And we've been in conversation, not just conversation, but we've actually entered into an MOU, so a formal agreement with MWMO and at least one of the developers, and hopefully another developer soon, around this question of what does maintenance look like if in the parks in Towerside, what does ownership look like in the parks in Towerside, what does this park look like in the context of other parks in our system, what does design look like, how does that get done, how does that get funded, how does the entire project get funded, and then what does programming look like, who programs the space. So we're really interested in, there's a lot of great examples out there. Jenna Fletcher presented on the public-private partnership models around the nation recently at CanCan. And it was really inspiring to see all the different models out there for public-private partnership. And that's, if we really want to think about innovation in our park system, how can we think about that in creative ways that maintain this as a public space for all? And we were brought to the table partly for that signature green space, so it's the community garden site next to the district stormwater site. But now it's rippled into this much bigger conversation, which we are very excited about. So here's that working in partnership. And it's become part of this larger system in part because of this regional trails conversation that is part of my planning process. So it's one of those really great strategic dovetails. And this is a map of the conversations around regional trail connections east of the river that are very alive right now. So starting with the river and working your way up, that potentially being called Bridal Veil Regional Trail. It's actually a regional search corridor for the Metropolitan Council Regional Trail Plan, which is great, which means that eventually there may be funding for regional trail build out for that segment. Heading up, crossing that rail yard, that's the big, the big question mark in the room. And then up through Mid-City Industrial, eventually meeting up with the parkways up in the more northern part of Northeast. And so that's when we talk about the Grand Rounds missing link, this is a really significant piece of connection for the park board that we are very passionate about and excited to work on implementing, but it's very much going to take an incremental strategic approach to build this out. So again, what is, in the context of Towerside, how can we dovetail this big vision into this sort of operationalizing of management, programming, build out? How can we think broadly about what a regional trail is? People gather, stormwater function, and in the context of these other parks, how is it programmed? How do we actually provide the park-like services that we want to provide our communities as we become more dense? Towerside's going to be growing up in terms of population, and we want to serve that community with public space. So I thought I'd just end on the non-sexy topic of funding, but that it's a really important one for us as we're thinking about this, especially in regard to park dedication fees. And I just wanted to make sure everyone in the room is aware of those. And that's one of the levers that we have as a public agency for ensuring that as districts are developing, we have a mechanism for funding additional green space for increasing density. And so this is a list of our funding mechanisms, but also working in collaboration with that public-private partnership, and how can we think really creatively about how to best use these public dollars. We have a really strong, so park dedication fees is when the developer pays in for each unit that's developed when they pull a building permit. So there's some projection that we can do in terms of what anticipated park dedication fees are, but really it's when that building permit is pulled, that's when the park dedication fees are put into a pot in the city, and they need to be used in the neighborhood where that development is occurring for the city of Minneapolis. This is a tool that's been used for 40 plus years around the nation. It's relatively new to the state of Minnesota, but it's definitely I'd say more of a market-driven funding tool versus something like our MPP 20 agreement with the city, which is the neighborhood park plan, the 20-year neighborhood park plan, which is focused on an equity metric and really puts the community characteristics, so focuses on sort of allocating funding to the parks that fall in more racially and ethnically diverse neighborhoods, lower income neighborhoods, neighborhoods with higher youth populations, higher crime rates, and higher density. Also for parks that have been underinvested in for the last decade or plus. So those are some of the sort of funding realities for us as we enter into this implementation piece, and it's really important for us to work in collaboration to implement this, because as this list looks long, it's not enough. So I'm also going to toggle now to my multiple hats. So as Catherine mentioned, we recently bought property in the creative enterprise zone, and I think we offer a very different perspective. So it's not as much of a systems approach, but more of a, hey, once these makers and creative and light industrial uses are in this neighborhood, what are some of the realities for these entities? And so we can speak a little bit to that perspective in terms of being in an innovation district as a small business owner, having recently moved here we came from Minneapolis, from the south side of Minneapolis where we had a warehouse, and moved to this new big building. And we'll talk a little bit about the challenges and risks associated with that, but also why we came, and also what we do as a business. So I'm going to hand it off to Tory.
I'll take this, I think. Yeah, so we've seen a lot of slides, and it's actually kind of exciting to see all the overlaps that happen in a group like this. And so I would say, to harken back to Alan's talk, we're the thunder and lightning in green and blue infrastructure. We are the ones that, when something goes from a design to getting built in the ground, Land Bridge, Ecological, our company, are the ones that figure out how to get it in the ground and maintain it for the long haul. The pictures on the left and the right of the screen are before and after of a garden actually in Towerside that I think just lapsed a little bit from the initial installation to the management, and it was probably a summer's worth of weeds that came up, but by the time we got the contract, that's a before and after of the work that we did, and a good example of one arm of our business, which is maintaining these green and blue infrastructure sites. This particular project is exemplary of a bigger project that we have with the city of Minneapolis, which we manage all of their green infrastructure sites. It includes projects like Heritage Park, and I think I've got a slide coming up here. But we actually use the Mississippi Green Team, which is a collaboration with the city of Minneapolis and the MWMO. It's a program that they bring, it's a youth work program. And we use these kids on some of our projects because we're trying to diversify our workforce, and I'll talk about that again in a little bit. But as Carrie mentioned, we bit off a big real estate transaction this winter in the Creative Enterprise Zone, and I think what drew us to this neighborhood was, you know, the excitement and all of the action and things that are happening there. We were really we outgrew our space in Seward neighborhood probably 2 years after we moved in there, and we had been looking for the right space to house our business for probably 2 years before we found this building, which is on the corner of Vandalia and University. And you know, there's a lot of reasons that we chose this location, but you know, the biggest reason was that we needed warehouse space to house our equipment. And so the northwest corner of this image here is our building. It's an old building. It needs a lot of work. There are going to be a lot of challenges for us, just in, you know, upkeep in a building that had a lot of deferred maintenance. But it was important for us, you know, because our work is so central to the city, it was important for us to find something in the city, and the Creative Enterprise Zone was one of our target areas when we were looking for real estate. Because it's centrally located, you know, we think a lot about systems and, you know, carbon footprints and, you know, how we impact the environment with the work that we do, and it was important for us, you know, to be central, and this location for us is that we can get, you know, within 15 minutes we can be, you know, in every corner of the Twin City metro area. But it was also important from a livability standpoint. Carrie and I live in St. Anthony Park, you know, so we're living here. We didn't want to, you know, commute out to the suburbs, which would have been a lot easier for us in a lot of respects, but we wanted to house our business and be in a place where there was enthusiasm and you know, some things going on, and we felt like the Creative Enterprise Zone was the perfect place for us for that reason. This is just an image of the northwest corner. There's tons of potential on our site. We felt like we just saw opportunity after opportunity on our site, and this would be the corner, you know, 1 block north of University, right across from Planned Parenthood. There's a little triangle of land there that, you know, we're talking about increasing pedestrian access and accessibility to the building from the light rail. But this is an opportunity for a privately owned public space that we're looking at creating. And so, you know, the overlap with public art, you know, like what could go here, you know, as an entry into, you know, a main artery of the zone, and how do we infiltrate stormwater, you know. And so, like, I know Mark's here, and, you know, we've talked to Forecast Public Art about, you know, opportunities to, you know, collaborate with an artist, and you know, how do we overlap these systems. This is a slide that's been up. A good example, we did not install this project, but this is a pretty good example of the type of work that we do. This is a slide of Heritage Park. that we actively maintain for the city of Minneapolis. This is one of their green infrastructure sites, and a pretty good example of, a habitat restoration in the heart of the city, and, a really good example of the type of work that we do. There's a heavier side to what we do. We have a lot of heavy equipment, and one of the reasons that we needed this space was, for the industrial nature of the site. But also, we have, a lighter side of what we do, which is a good day at work is walking through a prairie, assessing a site for endangered species. And so, the systems that matter for us as business owners in the zone are, property taxes are probably one of the biggest things that we're thinking about. How long can we maintain what we're doing here as, the property values increase around us? And just maintaining creative and light industrial spaces and businesses, like how do we create space and keep things affordable for people that we're trying to attract to our business location. I don't know, do you want to
Yeah, I'll talk to you.
finish up?
We said we tag team this one. So community network and new tenant interest and retention, that's something that Creative Enterprise Zone has been instrumental. Catherine and Aaron have sent us many connections to tenants that we've brought in. So we have about, we have 20 to 30 tenants inside the building. It's 50,000 square feet. We need about 10 of that. So we've become sort of these developers, so residents, small business owners now, developers in the neighborhood. Workforce development, so continuing to diversify our workforce, working with the city, hopefully. That's something we're really interested in, continuing to bring more young people of color into our industry. We love that we're centrally located at job sites. We are really interested in green infrastructure support. Tori mentioned that partnerships potentially with Watershed District. We are in great need of building facade improvements and would love to work in collaboration on that.